I'm sure you've heard all the complaints about open world games before, referring to your Ass-Cred, Far Cry, Horizons, Ghosts, and many more. Copy-pasted content, a lot to do but nothing meaningful to do, wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, tower climbing games, and yeah, there's a lot of merit to these complaints, but I sure played Assassin's Creed Odyssey for way too many hours as proof of their appeal. Repetitive, long-winded gameplay in a massive open world can be really relaxing and not mentally challenging for sure. Perfect to end a long day and unwind to with the podcast. And some of these games have decent enough combat and exploration systems to make them mechanically interesting, and you know I love to see number go up. On top of that, there are some intriguing, beautiful environments and the settings for your avatar to explore and check out. Notice I said environments and not worlds because in a lot of cases, well, at least to me, these places don't feel quite lived in or built like the real world. Sure, Odyssey's reconstruction of classical Greece is a historical marvel, just imagining its reconstruction from archaeological records, writings, and legends, and it is a technical beauty as well, but despite it being populated with many human models, it just feels like they're there without much to do besides walking, idling, or fighting a lot of the time. And that makes sense, since parts of the world you interact with as a literally superpowered Cassandra isn't what most people are interacting with. Most people in Athens don't care about this bounty on a mercenary, but you do. Many can't or won't fight in the Peloponnesian War, but you take out small armies single-handedly. And yeah, that's great for some reasons, but especially in these trying times, there's something to be appreciated in a world that makes you feel part of it. One in the crowd, not always above it. Frequenting shops and grabbing food, not grabbing collectibles on top of famous landmarks and checking them off your list to go to the next attraction in the theme park. Knowing an area like the back of your hand, not visiting a place once and then never coming back once you've looted it. There's a powerful feeling of inhabiting a world that is bigger than you, where you can only really affect your niche. And that is where Yakuza comes in. I suppose it's a little disingenuous to call Yakuza open world in the same way Assassin's Creed is. Wide swaths of land to explore is a completely different vibe than a few city blocks to run to and fro within. In no way am I suggesting that Assassin's Creed games would have been better for being more like Yakuza. The reason Odyssey is so big is in the title. However, I do think there are some things that games can learn from Yakuza as a series to further immerse players and make a world feel better inhabited and more convincing, rather than engage in the dick measuring contest that is always building a bigger world. But first, what is a Yakuza? Well, long series that has been around for about 15 years now, risen from the ashes of Shenmue as it crashed and burned under the weight of Yu Suzuki's vision? It's called Ryuga Gotoku in Japan, translating to like a dragon in reference to the series' primary protagonist until the most recent game at least, Kiryu Kazuma, who donned his back tattoo of a dragon and the title of Dragon Dojima. So yeah, they renamed it Yakuza in Western localization since that's what the games are about, and I'm assuming some Americans reading Like a Dragon will probably think Spyro instead of a street gang brawl. Despite the name of the series in the West, Kiryu spends little time actually in the Yakuza on screen, as he is either kicked out dishonorably or semi-retired much of the time. But he is still honor-bound to his adoptive family that the Tojo clan and many of its members are to him, and resolves most issues in his favor. And it is through this the game's narrative exists both as a compelling story about Yakuza with incredibly well-written and likable characters that you really root for, but also deeply criticize it and point out its shortcomings. But still, everyone's human. Though he looks like he could just beat about anyone up with the look, Kiryu instead focuses on the well-being of others no matter the situation. and the seeming duality is reflected by the game often alternating between deadly seriousness of the main plot and being just incredibly goofy and dumb in some side content. One minute you are fighting hordes of baddies to rescue a dear friend captured by a mob that would rather kill themselves and give up info on their organization, and the next you are singing karaoke, going to eat a beef bowl, or fighting men with a fetish for being treated like a baby, but it all feels natural and grounded despite this inherent weirdness. Like these two things that seem antithesis to each other can occur 10 minutes apart and a block away without tonal whiplash bruising your neck, and I think a lot of it has to do with the world it is set in, or rather the few square blocks. Most of the games are set in Kamurocho, Tokyo, known for being a hotspot for nightlife, shady business, and of course crime relative to the Japanese standards at least. In this neon-drenched, piss-soaked wonderland, you learn how to expect the unexpected to be a dramatic plot twist, gambling in an abandoned building, getting constantly challenged to a street fight by random thugs, or having to buy new underwear for someone who literally shit himself. It all feels plausible, even when it shouldn't be on paper sometimes, that all this is happening in a short time frame in a small but busy and crazy neighborhood. In a way kind of reminiscent of what little magic realism and magical realism influenced media I have engaged with, referring to types of fiction set in real life or near real worlds, but with supernatural elements that are more often taken for granted rather than called out. Separated from fantasy by a mundane setting, but differing from typical real-world fiction by often magical or bizarre plot elements. The author I'm most familiar with who uses this is Haruki Murakami, whose novels are often set in the late 20th century Japan using a narrator protagonist sometimes based off his real-life experiences, living his life as he learns more about himself and others. But he uses supernatural elements such as ghosts, apparitions, magical 13th floors, and mutant sheep to tell stories and drive the plot naturally rather than the narrator going, "Oh my god, it's a ghost, no way." The result is novel with a dreamlike mystical quality, but something that's also grounded, relatable, and empathetic as these elements are connected to the world and the characters' psyches. Yakuza exists in the same way, but with the main plot that is often deeply serious, but with plot elements containing blatant exaggerations that serve the main world without feeling too out of place. A final confrontation on top of a building that seemingly towers over the rest of Tokyo, an arena hidden underwater in one of Osaka's busiest neighborhoods, the incredibly variable effects of gunshots. None of this is called out, and it helps to establish the strangeness of these partially fictionalized regions of Japan, but in a way that is grounded, natural, and realistic. The sub-stories take this in stride as well, and they really accentuate the world and make it more memorable. Some of these sub-stories are the game at its dumbest, like getting hooked on a sexy bug wrestling game targeted at kids, and some are really heartfelt, like helping someone reconnect with an old friend to escape the wrath of their former game, and also trans rights. Kiryu treats these events with a similar gravity, despite slight bewilderment in the first as to be expected, and neither feel out of place. They all feel like they're part of Kamurocho, part of Kiryu's world, and part of Yakuza. And since they exist in the game overworld itself, not in some other plane of existence or menu, you remember these places as you walk by, game after game. You remember the alley where you bought a kid a porno mag, and it makes the world feel more lived in, along with the people walking down the streets, going about their everyday lives, talking about the going-ons in town, and upset when you bump into them naturally. The camera angle the game's largely used now, widely shot with not too much verticality, is enough to feel just a bit claustrophobic, and the city around you feels bigger, especially the rare moments when you look up. This differs from what the early games used, a more aerial shot making you feel like a tiny person in a large crowd, but if you ask me, it achieves a pretty similar goal, albeit with a different approach. Since you are walking and not driving, horseback riding, flying, or even really climbing around the world, it feels bigger, despite its on paper small size due to slower pace, in what easily feels like the most realistic yet still fun walking around a neighborhood I've seen in a game. Which, well, makes sense because the locales are very much based on real life analogs. Kamurocho is derived from Kabukicho in Tokyo's Shinjuku borough, a famous red light district known for its seediness and relatively high crime rate. Sotenbori used Osaka's Dotonbori as a base, featuring entertainment, riverwalk, so much food and nightlife, and tons of shopping nearby. I can't attest for Kamurocho personally, but Sotenbori gets everything about that feeling of Dotonbori when I visited, except the smell of all the food stalls. But seeing that we don't have to smell the champion district based off real life Golden Guy, I suppose that's a win in my book. Hell, the Dragon Engine games, including 6, Kiwami 2, Judgment, Like a Dragon, adding vending machines, achieving that truly authentic Japan sim, and less transition scenes, leading to some truly reactive moments like a Cowboy Bebop movie-esque situation where I started a brawl in a convenience store and got kicked out, thankfully not permanently. Speaking of food, the primary way of healing and a pastime in the games as much as real life is eating at restaurants. As a big fan of, well, food in general, I always look forward to seeing what Kiryu would scarf down, and sure he did too based on his remarks after eating. Trying all the different food is encouraged in your completion list and experience points, but it's also just fun to see what type of cuisine is on offer, especially in these areas very much known for their food. From sushi to your neighborhood ramen place, your staple beef bowls to expensive fugu, quickly grab takoyaki to a fancy set course meal, fast food and convenience snacks, jazz bars, izakayas. Maybe I'm just a food tourist, but one of my favorite parts about traveling is trying a locale's specialty foods, and this fits that urge besides, well, actually eating it, I suppose. In-game, it fleshes out the areas, having places to go in and shop, a reason to do it, and just adds to the immersion. On top of this, many of these places are actually real-life eateries, from larger chains like Yukaku Matsuya to smaller ones like Kushikatsu Garuma and Gindaku Highball Sakaba. In fact, the game does have quite a bit of product placement, not just the restaurants and food, but alcohol, the Megastore Wonderland Don Quixote, Sega's own arcades. It doesn't feel distracting to me. It's nothing like Mercedes-Benz and Mario Kart or Subway and Uncharted, largely because it's interspersed with generic and universe products that fit the ceiling and tone properly. If it gave the dev team a bit more money, I'm sure I'm a little bit okay with it. Instead, it kind of grounds the game and makes you remember that you are in near real-life Japan and the neighborhoods feel more like their counterparts, making the dual weirdness and seriousness of the story both stand out and make sense in character with the city. It never feels like it's distracting, and it's more kind of there than being shoved down your face for sure. Though, this could be, well, because I'm not Japanese and I don't live in Japan, so maybe it's more distracting there, I don't really know. What it does make me do is crave yakiniku and wish the Ikanari steak by me didn't close right before I moved here, but I guess that's marketing for you. But there's more to do besides just eating, drinking, and completing missions in the city. There's a glut of side activities too, some returning game to game and some unique across the entries. You've got darts, karaoke, arcade games, cards, mahjong, a literal pissing contest, among others, all of which are fleshed out enough to be fun, but not too much as to wear out its welcome and distract from the main game. As long as I would love lots more karaoke, I mean, listen to 24 Hour Cinderella. Each game has its own place on the map, not a menu, not copy-pasted everywhere, so it truly feels like being a patron of the business, and seeing Kiryu and the boys and girls just having fun really adds some nice levity to the experience. Which breaks a bit from the serious bits of the story and makes the gut punches feel even harder when you know that your husbando could be having the time of his life playing Virtua Fighter, but instead he actually has to fight for his life. There are also larger mini-games, such as running a cabaret club or a construction company, which not only contain extra story content and net you a lot of much-needed cash and experience, but encourage you to interact with the world in recruiting hostesses and employees from different sub-stories and to seek out different businesses to partner with. If all else fails, just feels good to walk around a fully realized neighborhood, and there's so much environmental detail, from analogs to real life to seeing dumb names being advertised around, and in the more recent games you can even take selfies with the photo mode, which is just dumb fun seeing Kiryu being dad energy. So you're probably asking now, after hearing me gush about the worlds of these games, should I play the Yakuza games? Yeah, I think you should check it out. I honestly feel like I've been missing out, not really knowing much about these games until recently, and I await being able to play 3 and through 6 since I don't have a PS4 right now. The series has jumped up to probably one of my favorites already in recent years, and Zero might be one of my all-time favorite games. If you want to start with the series too, I'd also recommend starting with Zero. As I just mentioned before, it is my favorite and the one I started with. It is the cheapest, from what I can see, running about $5 on sale on Steam. I've seen it cheap on the PS4 as well, physically and digitally, and is on Xbox Game Pass, console, and PC. A prequel to the series, released between 5 and 6, is set in the late 80s when the Japanese economy was in a period of unprecedented activity where everything was glitzy, shiny, and over the top. Because of this, the game is a little weirder than others that I've played so far, especially in some of the over-the-top sub-stories and even some animations, but that just makes it better at grabbing your interest and running with it. Well, yeah, knowing some future events does increase the impact to seeing some returning characters when they are younger. I don't think you'll be missing on that much that you won't remember playing later on. The way they introduce the characters of Kazuma Kiryu and Goro Majima is just captivating to say the least, and I immediately fell attached and in love with my new husbandos. Maybe more importantly, it also introduces you to the little bubble worlds that are Kamurocho and Sotenbori. That said, Yakuza Kiwami, the remake of the first game with the same engine as Zero, isn't a bad place to start either. The game is shorter, has a bit less content, if that's what you're after, though much of the side content expects you to have played Zero, as well as in Yakuza Kiwami 2. I can only attest to the way that Zero had me in love at first sight as well, or first waltz into a realistic yet magical place that you come to inhabit and feel truly a part of. Thankfully, the series has blown up a bit lately and has become a lot more accessible to Westerners especially. From the looks of it, though I haven't played them, Judgment and Yakuza 7, well, Yakuza 7 in Japan, but it's known as Yakuza Like a Dragon in the US, seem to be excellent games and fantastic starting points as well, being somewhat disconnected from the stories of Yakuzas 1 through 6, Zero, Dead Souls, the spin-offs where you're like Samurai, Kiryu, and all of that. So maybe welcome to Yakuza. Could be your new home, or maybe you just played it for the memes, so you can Bakam the Tai and Kiryu-chan to your heart's content. You do you. I don't have the authority to make you play it, but I mean, you could, right?